Okay, so in our last episode, we were talking about how the United States originally started looking eastward, but very early in its history, it started this long trend of actually starting to face west. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of complicated themes going on in American society simultaneously in the 1800s, and they all sort of twist and blend together into quite a story. And the first story that we're talking about is technological change. It's a dynamic change of technology is the first one, and we're really talking about the canal and the steamboat and the railroad and the turnpike. And the canals were really important. Of course, a canal and water can float a lot of product and make it very light, and it's the travel is faster and so forth. And so an example of the impact of the canal, and really the greatest of all canals, but this whole country was just filled with canals, including Connecticut, which had the Farmington Canal, which I think went as far up as maybe Springfield, Massachusetts, down to New Haven, Connecticut. But the Canal of Canals, of course, was created by DeWitt Clinton, who Clinton, Connecticut is named after. And it was the Erie Canal, which connected Lake Erie and I think even Lake Ontario over the Erie Canal, which goes all the way to the Hudson River and then down to New York City. And so this essentially extended New York City's hinterland to include just a massive, massive territory. And that was one of the things, really the thing, that fueled the growth of New York City in the early 1800s, when it became probably second to Philadelphia as the largest city in the new nation. And so canals were a big way of opening up the West. They were very influential. And then another one, of course, is the steamboat, which had ramifications for ocean travel, not needing to rely on sail. But for westward expansion, it was really important because you could have a flat-bottomed boat that could really make its way like up the Mississippi River, for instance, or up the Connecticut River. The Connecticut River, I would know from my own experience, can only be like 18 inches deep in spots. So now you can have this paddle boat driven by steam, and it can make it into the inland areas much further than the old sailing vessels. And so the steamboat was really important as well. And then further, you weren't relying on nature for your propulsion. So you could just, it's much more reliable. And it's not surprising at this time that with the railroad and the steamboat and the canal, the pocket watch actually became important. Prior to that, the sundial was enough to tell time, because really, what difference did it make what minute it was? But all of a sudden, now you could have boats and railroads and canals coming in quite precisely, and the minute would matter. And of course, now some things with internet technology, I suppose the millisecond could matter. The railroad was just at the onset, also driven by steam, by the way, but the railroad was just at its onset in the early 1800s and didn't really hit its heyday till mid-century, really with the acceleration of with the Civil War to move product and troops around. And then finally, of course, roads as well. Roads were very unreliable in the 1700s. The mud in the roads and these horse-drawn carriages were sinking in the mud with their metal wheels, and they would have to wait for the ground to be frozen. Roads were dangerous and not well kept, and the turnpike was actually like a toll road, and it was well taken care of and reliable. And roads going through those Appalachian Mountains, for instance, represented a big improvement in the transportation around the young country. So these are 4 of the new technologies. You also have the water wheel for New England factories, and that is going to bring up we mentioned like that leads to a revolution in transportation. New factories is the first industrial revolution in the early 1800s, right here in New England, with factories like Lowell, really all over Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York. This is the heyday for the northeastern United States. And then we have this concept of a market revolution, which I would like to bring up top here, is this idea of a market revolution, which is the difference between subsistence and commercial farms. So in this case, subsistence farms are when you produce your own food. And so therefore, in a subsistence farm, you're producing a little of everything. You're storing it yourself. And there is little extra. However, in a commercial farm, you're really producing just one type of product, producing one or few products, and you're selling it all to market. And not only are you selling it all to market, this has really profound influences. It's a really big deal. Not only are you selling it all to market, but you are dependent on the market. But then you're buying your own items. I don't know why that's bigger, but you get the idea. You're buying your own items, your own food. Even though you have a farm, you're still buying food from other farmers who specialize in one product or another. So that is nutty. Like, it's weird that you would think that these people would have their farms. Whoa, that's not the direction I wanted to go in. They would have their farms, but in reality, they're selling this for commerce. And that's the root of commercial, of course, is commerce. And it's not a subsistence farm anymore. And so the well-being of a farm is now dependent on the supply and demand of a market. That's not going to be good. The supply and demand of a market. Whereas the subsistence farmer, which was Jefferson's vision, that was his vision for the country. This was quickly on its way out, the subsistence farm. Well, what made these two things available was the idea that you could bring your crops to market quickly enough before they spoil. And the technology, the transportation revolution, allowed that to happen. So if we go down here to this idea, really what we were talking about, this is a fun little phrase that I enjoy, is the age of farm and sale, which is like the 1700s, to the age of factory and rail as the primary form of transportation and production. And this is the 1800s. And there's a lot of truth to this. And the more we go on, I think the more you'll see connections. So, I think that those are largely the things that enabled westward expansion to take place, sort of the causes of westward expansion, and we will pause there.